The train screeched to a halt in the dusty town of Red Creek, its iron wheels grinding against the tracks as steam hissed into the late afternoon air. The platform, lined with merchants, farmers, and townsfolk curious for the day's arrivals, came alive with chatter as passengers stepped down in stiff boots and travel-worn dresses. Among them was a young woman clutching nothing but a small carpet bag, her frame slender, her eyes wide with both fear and hope. Her name was Clara Bennett, and she had come west, not with wealth, not with a dowry, not even with possessions of any worth. She had come as a mail-order bride, an answer to a stranger's letter written by a cowboy in search of more than just companionship. Clara's heart raced as her boots touched the platform. She had left behind a life of hardship in the East, the poverty of a collapsing home, the absence of family after sickness took her parents, and the cruel whispers of neighbors who had called her nothing more than a burden. She brought with her no trinkets, no heirlooms, nothing to call her own, except the courage to begin again. She searched the crowd nervously, wondering what kind of man would be waiting, what kind of fate she had bound herself to. And then she saw him. Cole Thatcher stood tall, his broad shoulders framed by the fading sun, his hat casting a shadow over eyes the color of storm clouds. He was rugged, his shirt dusty from the trail, his boots worn but sturdy, and though he carried himself with quiet strength, there was a gentleness in his gaze that stopped Clara's trembling breath. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, not possession, not judgment, but recognition, as if he knew the weight she carried and had already chosen to help her bear it. He stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture both respectful and tender. "Miss Bennett?" he asked, his voice low, steady, carrying the accent of wide plains and endless horizons. Clara nodded, clutching her bag tighter, her throat dry. She expected his eyes to drop to her empty hands, to the lack of finery she could offer, but instead he only studied her face, as though he had found the very thing he'd been waiting for. She managed a small, uncertain reply. "Yes, I'm Clara." For a moment, silence stretched, broken only by the clatter of the train preparing to pull away. Then Cole smiled, just faintly, but enough to soften the sharpness of his jaw. He extended his hand, and when Clara hesitated, he whispered words that rooted themselves deep in her soul. "The mail-order bride brought nothing, yet I already have what I need." Clara blinked, her chest tightening, because he couldn't know how deeply her shame ran, how convinced she had been that without possessions or beauty, she was nothing. Yet here was a man who looked at her as though she were enough. Her fingers, trembling, slipped into his calloused palm, and he held her hand firmly, grounding her. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you home." The wagon ride out of town stretched into the evening. The sky turned to fire, painting the plains in shades of gold and crimson. Clara sat beside Cole, her bag at her feet, her eyes scanning the open land. She had never seen such vastness, such freedom stretching endlessly, and it frightened her almost as much as it awed her. She worried about the life awaiting her, about the expectations she could not meet, about what Cole truly thought of the woman he had invited into his world. But every time her fear rose, she felt his presence beside her, quiet, steady, a reassurance that calmed the storm in her chest. They spoke little on the ride, but when she shivered as the night air cooled, Cole removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders without a word. By the time they reached his ranch, the stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds spilled from heaven. The cabin was modest but strong, its light glowing warm against the dark. A barn stood nearby, and Clara could hear the soft whinny of horses, the rustle of cattle in the corral. This was not just land, it was a life, one Cole had built with his own hands. She felt small standing before it, her bag clutched in both hands, her doubts louder than ever. But Cole looked at her, and in that look was not disappointment, not impatience, but something she could hardly name, hope, maybe even gratitude. "It's not fancy," he said, gesturing toward the cabin, "but it's home, and I'd be honored to share it with you." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine, with a single fire casting warmth across the room. It was simple, just a table, chairs, a bed, and shelves lined with books and tools. But to Clara, it felt like a palace compared to the cold rooms she had left behind. She set her bag down, unsure of what to do. But Cole took off his hat, placed it on the peg near the door, and turned to her with a softness in his eyes. "You must be tired. You can rest. We'll take things one step at a time." Clara nodded, but when he turned to stoke the fire, her composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She covered her face, ashamed of her weakness. But Cole was there in an instant, kneeling beside her. "Clara," he said, his voice hushed but firm. "Don't hide from me. Not your tears, not your fears. You brought nothing, you think, but you brought yourself. And that's everything I asked for." Her sobs shook her shoulders, but his words sank into the deepest parts of her. He didn't see her as a burden. He didn't see her as less. He saw her as the gift. She leaned into him, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to be held. His arms wrapped around her with a strength that promised she was safe, and his whisper echoed in her heart. "I already have what I need." The night deepened, the fire crackled, and though they were strangers bound by a letter, something greater than chance had begun to weave them together. Clara closed her eyes, her head resting against his shoulder, and for the first time since she boarded the train, she felt a flicker of peace. Little did she know, this was only the beginning, because life in Red Creek was not without its storms, and love, as tender as it was fierce, would be tested by fire and shadow. But in that moment, beneath the western sky, Clara believed in the promise of a man who saw her not as nothing, but as everything. The days after Clara's arrival at Red Creek, ranch passed like a slow-moving river, steady and full of unseen depths, and though she still sometimes woke in the night unsure of where she was, unsure if her choice to come here had been a mistake, she would always rise to see Cole already at work outside, his figure strong against the endless horizon, and each time he turned toward her and smiled that quiet, reassuring smile, something in her chest softened and told her she was right where she was meant to be. She learned quickly that ranch life was no gentle task. It was sweat and calluses, mud caked on skirts, aching muscles from hauling water and chopping vegetables, and the constant hum of responsibility that never slept. Yet, Cole never once made her feel small for fumbling with chores she had never done before. When she dropped a bucket at the well, splashing water everywhere, Cole only chuckled and showed her how to grip the rope with confidence. When she burned a loaf of bread black as coal, he ate a slice anyway and swore it was better than anything he had tasted in town. Slowly, Clara began to believe she could be useful here, that she wasn't simply a burden. But the doubt inside her still whispered at night, when the wind howled against the wooden walls and she lay awake wondering what she had truly brought to this man who had risked his future for her. Trouble did not wait long before it came knocking. Dawson Pike, the neighboring rancher, had always carried bitterness like a cloak, and when word spread that Cole Thatcher had taken in a mail-order bride, Pike was the first to laugh loudest in the saloon, sneering about how Cole had married a woman who brought nothing with her. That bitterness turned to poison the day Dawson rode up to the ranch with 2 hired men, his face twisted into a smug grin. Clara was sweeping the porch when she first saw him, her heart pounding as the men dismounted, and Dawson's gaze slid over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "So this is what you sent for," he said to Cole, who had stepped out to meet him, his jaw already tight. "No dowry, no cattle, no land. Just another mouth. You always were a fool, Thatcher." Clara felt her face flame with shame. But before she could retreat inside, Cole's voice rang sharp and steady. "Careful, Dawson. She's worth more than you'll ever understand, and I'd thank you to keep your mouth shut on my land." Dawson laughed, but there was no warmth in it, only malice, and before he rode off, he spat into the dirt and promised he'd be back, his words heavy with a threat neither Clara nor Cole could ignore. That night, Clara sat by the fire, her hands trembling, her voice breaking as she whispered, "He's right, Cole, I came here with nothing. Maybe I've only made your life harder." Cole turned to her, kneeling down so she would look into his eyes. "Clara," he said, his voice as steady as the earth beneath them, "you are not what you carry in your hands. You are what you carry in your heart, and that heart has given me more than I ever dared hope for. You've filled this place with something I never had before. Hope, warmth, a reason to come home at night. Don't you ever say you brought nothing, because you've given me everything I need." His words sank into her like sunlight breaking through clouds, and though she still feared Dawson Pike, she began to believe that maybe her worth was not measured in gold or land, but in the love she could give. Weeks passed, and Clara grew stronger in ways she had never thought possible. She woke before dawn to knead dough with steady hands. Her bread finally soft and golden, she gathered eggs from the hens, her laughter echoing through the yard when a feisty rooster tried to chase her. Cole taught her to ride, his hand firm on the reins as he guided her through the fields, Until one day she was galloping on her own, the wind tangling her hair, her laughter carrying across the prairie. These small victories built her confidence, and soon the townsfolk who once whispered about the empty-handed bride began to see her differently. At Sunday gatherings she shared pies and kind words, her presence slowly weaving her into the fabric of the community. Cole watched it all with quiet pride, his heart swelling each time she smiled. To him, Clara was no longer just the woman who answered a letter. She was the heartbeat of his home. But Dawson Pike was not a man who forgot a grudge. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, Clara woke to the sound of horses outside, voices raised and the sickly glow of torches. Fear wrapped around her like a shroud as she rushed to the window, seeing Dawson and his men gathered in the yard. "Thatcher!" Dawson's voice thundered in the night. "You think you can stand above me with your empty-handed bride? You think she belongs to you? She should have been mine." Cole was already pulling on his boots, strapping his revolver at his side. Clara grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. "Don't go out there, Cole. Please, they'll kill you." He looked at her with steady eyes, placing his hand over hers. "Clara, listen to me. They can take cattle, they can take fence posts, but they will never take you. Because I already have what I need, and I'll fight for it as long as I breathe." He kissed her forehead gently, then stepped into the night, his silhouette framed by firelight. The confrontation was fierce, Dawson demanding Clara as if she were some prize to be won. Cole stood firm, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You'll never have her, Dawson. She chose me and I chose her. She isn't a possession. She's my heart. And if you come for her, you'll have to come through me." For a long moment the yard was silent, but for the restless stamping of horses. Dawson's hand twitched near his gun, but the fire in Cole's eyes made even him hesitate. With a snarl he spat in the dirt, signaling his men to turn away, but his glare promised he would not forget this night. As the hoofbeats faded into the dark, Clara rushed into Cole's arms, trembling but safe, her tears soaking his shirt as he held her close. "You brought nothing," he whispered into her hair, "but you gave me everything I'll ever need." From that night forward, Clara's doubts began to fade. She was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived empty-handed. She was a partner, a wife in spirit, if not yet by law, and the ranch was as much hers as it was Cole's. Together they mended fences, shared laughter over supper, rode side by side across golden fields, and built a life rooted in love, not possessions. In town, people began to speak of them with respect, their bond a quiet reminder that true worth could never be measured by wealth but by the strength of a heart. And when autumn came, with leaves turning gold and the air sharp with change, Cole took Clara's hand beneath the open sky, the preacher standing before them, and spoke words that sealed their journey. "She came with nothing, but she gave me everything, and I will spend the rest of my life proving I was worthy of her gift." Clara, tears streaming, whispered her vow in return, and the crowd fell silent, moved by the power of a love that had bloomed where no one expected. Their story was no fairy tale. There would still be storms and struggles, nights of fear and days of toil. Dawson Pike's shadow lingered at the edges, waiting for his chance to strike again. But Clara no longer saw herself as nothing. She saw herself as loved, as chosen, as more than enough. And Cole knew that whatever trials came, he had already been given the greatest treasure of his life. And dear listener, if this story of Clara and Cole touched your heart, if you walked with them through fear and triumph, let their journey remind you that love isn't about what you hold in your hands, but what you give from your soul. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of courage, hope, and love that overcomes every obstacle, then make sure to stay with us and subscribe to the channel, because there are many more tales waiting just for you.